Welcome. This is the Insider's Guide to Real Estate. My name is Victor Normand, and I'm your host today. Today the topic is the septic system. We're going underground mostly. If you live in a suburban community in the Commonwealth, chances are you have a septic system. Almost a third of all households do. And for those homeowners, a Title V certificate or a Title V mound is familiar. Title V mound often looks like somebody's buried a bus on your front lawn. Here this morning to explain all that is my guest, Andy Curtis, who is the CEO of Curtis Septic Services. Andy's been in the business for over 30 years. He's done 5,000 inspections, and his company has installed over 1,000 septic systems. So let's get right into it and welcome Andy to our show. Hello, Andy.
Hi, Victor. Thanks for having me.
Let's start right off. Tell us in short order, what is a septic system and why is it called a system?
It's called a system because it consists of several different components, Victor. A septic system, by definition, is an on-site sewage treatment facility where you're actually cleaning the wastewater before it's released into the environment. A conventional system consists of a septic tank, distribution box, and a soil absorption system, which is new terminology for a leaching field or leaching facility.
Okay. So if you're buying or selling a home, a Title V certificate is required. It's required not by law, but by the lenders mostly, and as a practical matter, everyone needs to have one. So what is a Title V certificate? How do you get one? And what's it used for?
Sure, Victor. And a Title V certification is required by Mass State Health Code. It went into effect March 30th, 1995, that regulation, and it basically reads that every property that transfers in Massachusetts, whether it be commercial, residential, restaurants, office buildings, needs to have an inspection of the sewage treatment system by a state licensed inspector. And that's during the transfer of a property. If you increase the design flow, which would be adding a bedroom, or if you're changing the footprint, which would be basically adding foundation to the house, you are required by state code to do that. And the lenders also do require it also.
So in my experience, the lenders require that the certificate indicate that the system has passed, but the certificate could indicate that it's failed, and somebody could buy a house with a failed septic system, but they would need to make it comply before they could occupy the house?
That's right. So in the state code in 310 CMR, Victor, what it says is that you have to do the inspection, but there isn't really an enforcement that you have to fix it. You're allowed up to 2 years to make the remedies, and that's typically enforced by a buyer or a financial institution that's loaning the money on the property.
Okay. So I'm going to buy a house, and the house is 30 years old, and I've asked the seller for a Title V certificate, and they're able to produce one. Now again, the house is 30 years old, the septic system is 30 years old. Should I be concerned about that?
From a buyer's perspective, probably. Again, passing Title V, what I like to explain to my customers, Victor, is that when we do a Title V inspection, it's the Department of Environmental Protection that sets these regulations, and the emphasis is on environmental impact, not necessarily on performance. Pre-1995, we used to do a performance inspection. After 1995, the DEP came up with a format that we're all using now. It's a 16, 17-page report that addresses more of environmental setbacks. How far is it from a private or public well? How far above the water table? And how is it working under current conditions? So with an average lifespan of a septic system being about 25 years before they clog up and need to be replaced, it's very possible that they can last 30 years, but it's more or less what I say is buyer beware. When you get into a 30-year-old system that passes an environmental inspection, it does not address the performance of that system. More similar to like an inspection sticker on a car. It tells you that it's safe and it meets all the safety requirements set by the state, but is environmentally friendly, but it doesn't necessarily address under the same usage or increased flow, more people in the house, that you're going to get what results you're going to get.
So there's no way to tell what the life expectancy of a septic system is?
There really isn't. The average lifespan is around 25 years, but we do quite a few. We do over 100 service calls a week, and we'll see systems on a very regular basis that are 30, 35 years old with several years left of life, apparently, in them. The reason why we can't tell the lifespan is because the factors that determine that two of the factors are usage and maintenance, and not knowing what that's going to be in the future, it would be impossible, virtually impossible, to tell how much longer they have.
Okay, so you've got a septic system that's 30 years old, and you want to go forward and buy the house. The concern many consumers today is, am I going to end up with a Title V mound? Title V mounds I've only seen them around for the past 20 years. What's that all about? Why do these mounds exist?
A mounded system is typically where your leaching facility, again, the terminology that we use in the code is soil absorption system, shortened down to SAS, which stands for soil absorption system, which is a leach field, leach trenches, leach pits, whatever you're using for that drainage facility that would go after the tank and let the wastewater drain into the ground. So in Title V state code, what it says is in regular soil conditions, you have to have a 4-foot separation between the bottom of the soil absorption system and the high groundwater. And in order to achieve that, quite often when they dig a test hole on a site known as a deep hole during a preliminary testing before the septic's designed, they'll discover that, for example, if water table is at 4 feet, that means the bottom of your new system is going to start at grade at the lawn level and typically be about 1 foot thick with 1 foot of cover on top of it. In that scenario, you may have a 2-foot mound. Okay.
So your company is very familiar with some of the alternative and innovative systems. Tell us what those are and how those might be used in some circumstances to avoid a mound.
Right. So there's a category in the state health code in Title V that's called Innovative Alternative Technologies, which is abbreviated as IA technologies, and it consists of a lot of different types of systems that have been created. There's lots of different brand names that I won't get into right now, but they provide further treatment than a conventional septic system. They've been third-party tested by NSF and approved by the DEP as superior treatment. And what that allows them to do is go with instead of a 4-foot offset to that groundwater, they can go with a 2-foot offset, quite a few of these systems. Some of them would be like an ATU known as an aerobic treatment tank, something that introduces air into the system and would make it an anaerobic environment as opposed to or make it an aerobic environment as opposed to an anaerobic environment, which is in a traditional septic tank. Okay. And in that environment, you get much cleaner wastewater, therefore you can go closer to the groundwater.
Okay, so I'm thinking if you are introducing air, it's some kind of a mechanical system. Can I expect to pay a lot more money for an innovative system?
Not necessarily. Most of those innovative systems are working with air induction through a blower system, but there are some, like a Presby system or an ADS GeoFlow, that allow passively air to vent through the system and get in there and create aerobic environment, which will be a lot more beneficial to eating away the solids, a lot more cleaner effluent. You're not necessarily paying more because of the reductions that you get. You're paying more for the equipment up front, but then the offset is you're saving quite a bit. You can get up to a 50% reduction in the footprint of the system. So if you have 1,000 square foot, you can go down to 500 square feet quite often, or some of these allow a 40% reduction. But on top of that, if you get a 2-foot offset to groundwater, you're going to save on materials such as sand and fill. Okay. So not only is it aesthetically pleasing, but it's going to save, and it usually supersedes the number that you paid for the equipment. Okay. So.
All right, good. So again, let's get back to my hypothetical case. I'm buying this older house, and the septic system has failed. So because the original septic system had been built 30 or 40 years ago, I can assume that the standards for septic systems have changed, and I may be faced with having a mound, but I don't know. Is there a way to tell up front whether or not my new septic system, my replacement septic system, is going to require a mounded?
Sure, great question, Victor, and there is a way. So what we have is we have regulations. 310 CMR covers not just inspections, but how we determine water table, who would determine water table, and all the setbacks, the 4-foot offset to groundwater, the 5-foot offset if it's in fast draining soils like sand. And so Title V goes back to like the late 70s. Before that, they had Article 11, which was a much shorter version of the rules and regulations in Massachusetts. But in 1995, what they did is they came out with regulations that said, we're no longer going to do a perk test, which is the test that precedes the septic system design, in the wet season. We're going to do it year-round. So that's the good news. You don't have to wait till the spring or fall to do it. What quite happens, though, we no longer look for water in the hole. We look for staining. and the word in the industry that we use is modeling or redox. And when we see that indication that the water's been up to that level, we design off of the staining or the modeling.
Okay, when you say we, who exactly is the we?
So on a typical preliminary testing, we call it a perk test, but it also involves a deep hole and a drainage test to see how fast the soil can absorb water. But talking about the elevation of the system would be specifically to that deep hole. When we dig the deep hole, we meaning a backhoe operator like myself, someone from my company, accompanied by an engineer that's a soil evaluator in Massachusetts, a design engineer, and the Board of Health, who's also a soil evaluator, would be present on site to witness it from the municipal perspective to make sure everything's getting done accurately.
So there's an actual designation as soil evaluator?
Yes, there is a designation. A soil evaluator is either a Board of Health agent or a design engineer that's taken the state's course on how to determine what the water table is without seeing water. So they're looking for staining or modeling in the soil that would indicate telltale signs of where the water was at its peak level.
So if I call you up and I say, Andy, come on over to this house I want to buy and take a look at what do you think? Am I really going to need a mound here? Are you able to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a question that I get asked every day by a buyer, a seller, a realtor, an investor, builders. They ask that all the time, and the answer isn't on top of the ground. So am I able to do it? Yes, I am able to do it, but not from looking at the top of the ground. What it would consist of is having a backhoe out there, digging a test hole, and not only someone like myself with over 30 years of experience to determine that water table, but the engineer that's going to design it would need to call the water table, and the Board of Health would need to be present to make sure that they agree that that's the actual water table, and that would be real important to have that done. That could be done. It's not done too often, but you could easily spend around $1,000 to perform that and have a landscape scar in the yard where quite often we get on the edge of the woods if possible, maybe in the leaves or something, not right in the middle of the lawn, and try and do that preliminary testing.
Okay, so even though I know you, Andy, and I try to get you to come over and take a look at this property I want to buy, and you tell me, look, if you really want to know, this is what you have to do, and I break down and I spend $1,000. What do I get? Can I rely on the report that I get from this?
You can. That's another good question, Victor. You can rely on it if you do it that way. Not too many people want to spend the money before they buy the house, but we can research records and look what the neighbors have, but we have quite a few instances where we've put in raised systems at one property and next door they don't have a raised system. So soil conditions and water tables, which typically go together, water tables drop, and they can drop in 100 feet. You could have a house that's directly across the street from another that is flat, and you buy the house next door and you end up with a 3-foot or 4-foot mound. That's not unusual in this business.
Okay.
So can you rely, if you have the engineer and the Board of Health present and they do the soil testing and record it, document it on the state form, you can rely on that information. And what that would give you, for someone like me that's an installer with a lot of experience, I could take that form and turn it into an approximate ballpark and say you're probably looking at $10,000 to $15,000 or maybe $15,000 to $20,000 for a system. I would also definitely be able to tell you the finished grade height by consulting with the engineer.
All right, that's important. So now, Andy, you've talked about state regulations, you've talked about the local Board of Health. Who's really in charge here? Who's really making the determinations on septic system approvals?
Right, so everything's state the regulations are written by the DEP, Department of Environmental Protection. They write all the regulations and they set like the baselines. And then we have, I believe, 351 towns in Massachusetts that interpret those. And my experience being licensed in 80 of those towns is that they all interpret them a little bit differently. Okay, and they're allowed to do that by state code. They're allowed to interpret that. They're supposed to use the state regulations as a baseline and then go from there. So, for example, some towns may have, the state says a 4-foot offset to groundwater. Some towns choose to go with a 5-foot offset. A private well, you have to be 100 feet from a well to the edge of the soil absorption system. Some towns say it's better to go 150 feet. And the same thing with property lines. You got to be 10 feet off a property line. Some towns elect to go 30 feet off a property line with a septic system. So they can add to the code.
So you have two layers of approval. You need to meet the state requirements and you need to meet local requirements.
Yes, yes.
So in Acton, I know you do a lot of business and we do as well. Tell us about what it's like to get a septic permit.
Well, in Acton, they do have some specific regulations. So we call it standard Title V when we're talking to an engineer or a Board of Health agent, if they don't have any other ones. But like in Acton, for example, we have a state inspector's license. Each one of myself and my employees has a state inspector's license. And then what they'll do is Acton has their own license for inspectors. So you have to be licensed by the state as well as the town of Acton to perform an inspection in Acton. They have some fees that other towns don't have to review the reports. Some towns don't have the opportunity to review the reports. They just file them. So Acton reviews them, and they have a fee of $60, I believe it is, for that has to be accompanied with the inspection. So as an inspector, we have 30 days to turn that report in to the local approving authority, which is the Board of Health.
Okay. And this actual permit is issued by the local Board of Health?
Yeah, the local boards of health oversee everything up to 10,000 gallons a day, which is a pretty big system. We don't see too many of them, but everything up to that is overseen by the local Board of Health, known as the LLA, Local Approving Authority. I call it the Board of Health. And they oversee everything. They do the permitting, they do the inspections, and the final sign-offs, certificates of compliance.
All right. Okay, so let's talk about additives. I'm going to sell my house. I've got an old septic system. I've called you up to do an inspection. I'm up late at night and I'm watching an infomercial that tells me about these products I can enter into my septic system that will make it perform well. Is that a good idea?
Well, my opinion is that you're not going to get too much of a benefit from most of them. Back in '95, they made all the additives, the state made all the additives illegal unless they could prove they didn't harm septic systems. And then in the state code, it's 310 CMR 027, they talk about additives and they say, it summarizes down to, they've proven that they don't harm septic systems. Acton, the town of Acton went a little bit further and they said it's illegal to put any additives in without approval from the Board of Health. Okay, so even if they're approved by the state as not harming septic systems, they're not, Acton does not allow that, and it's a finable offense.
Really?
If you
So even though it does no harm, they won't let me do it? Why would that be?
Well, there's different additives that they have out there. There's enzymes, there's bacteria, there's emulsifiers, there's things that you can put into your septic system that some of these people that would try and sell it to me over the years, knowing that I would be a good salesperson for them, would give us free samples and we'd put it into a septic system and it might be like a degreaser, like, for example, something that you would be more familiar with would be like dish soap. And what it is an emulsifier you add it to your dishes and it liquefies the grease and allows it to come off your dishes. It'll do the same thing in a septic system. So essentially you want the solid matter to get caught in the tank. And if you put an emulsifier or some of these additives into your septic system, it can liquefy the grease and allow it to go into your soil absorption system, which will eventually clog it up, re-solidify. It's a dead-end street, your septic system, so it's not a good idea to liquefy what's in your tank and get it out of your tank. You want to keep it there.
So is the leach field itself that component in the septic system that is most likely to fail?
Yeah, the leach field, soil absorption system are the same thing, different terminology, but your leach field consists of typically a series of perforated pipe laying in a bed of stone or sand, and what it does is distributes the water evenly throughout that area and lets it trickle down through the sand. So the failure, when a system fails, typically what's happened is it's the interface where the product, whether it be a pipe or a stone system, where it meets the native soil, we call that the interface, and that's where the clogging takes place. So a development of biomat, we call it, which is a growth of bacteria, which is your friend at first. It helps clean the wastewater, eventually gets too thick, and it stops the water from flowing through it. So eventually you get hydraulic failure, where you're putting water into the system faster than it can filter into the ground, at which point it'll either back up into the facility or come up out of the ground, whatever's easier.
So the fix for a failed soil absorption system is to dig it up and replace the soil around the pipes?
Right. By state code and by Acton regulations, what you have to do when you got a failed leach field, so on a Title V inspection, just to back up a little bit, there's actually 4 categories. There's pass, conditional pass, further evaluation, and fail. So pass means no problems. Conditional pass means there's one component that needs to be fixed. For example, a distribution box needs to be fixed, or the tank's leaking, that needs to be fixed, or a pipe's broken. If you fall into further evaluation, it's a specific category, and you have to check with the local Board of Health to see what they want you to do. Typically, that's when you have a well that's too close to a septic system. They may require the well to get tested. And then a failure would almost always mean that it's the leaching facility or the soil absorption system that's clogged up, at which point they tell you to contact the Board of Health, and the Board of Health is going to instruct you to hire a private engineer to do what we call a perk test, which really consists of a perk test, a deep hole, surveying the property, drawing up a septic design, and then from there you can put it out for bids and get prices. So it's a costly and lengthy process.
So if the Title V inspection indicates that the distribution box has failed, can you just replace the distribution box, or do you have to bring the whole system up to
No,
compliance?
you can just replace that component. It wouldn't fall into fail. If it's just the distribution box, it would fall into conditional pass. So it's not just pass or fail, it's 4 categories. So conditional pass, so if you use one company to do your inspection and they check off conditional pass, what I would recommend to the consumer is getting a list from the Board of Health of licensed installers and getting several prices on it.
Okay.
And they can replace just that. They can get a permit for just that one component.
Okay. So now I have a very old house, and what I have in my backyard is a cesspool that I've been told. How does a cesspool differ from a septic system?
So a cesspool is more used probably back in the 60s and before, early 60s and before. We see cesspools, and they're either made out of field stones or cement block typically. They're an open bottom pit, and basically the emphasis was disposal. They would take the wastewater untreated and let it go directly into the ground. Where a septic system's 2 parts typically, a tank where you get primary treatment, you remove most of the solids, allow bacteria to eat away a lot of the solid matter, and then you're putting it through a filter that's strategically placed in a safe spot above the water table, far enough from a well in a wetland, swamp, streams, things like that. Where a cesspool quite often is into the bottom of it due to the configuration being deep and not so wide. They're usually 6 or 7 feet deep. They're very commonly into the groundwater. But again, they're not providing any treatment. They're letting untreated water go directly into the ground. So back in 95, originally 94, when they had the public hearings, the DEP, they said they were illegal, and they got a lot of resistance to that. And very quickly they changed that code, and they said they're legal, you can have a cesspool, and they gave a set of guidelines that they have to pass, which not too many of them pass. But we do see cesspools out there, but once they fail, you can't get a permit to fix a cesspool. You have to replace it with a modern day conventional system.
So that might be an instance where an innovative system might be appropriate if it's an older house, typically in a completely built up neighborhood, not much land associated with the house.
Right. And not all lots need innovative alternative technology, but what lots need that is if they have a high groundwater table and they're trying to avoid a mounded system, that would be an applicant that I would suggest to try innovative alternative technology like an aerobic treatment tank that would give them a 2-foot offset to groundwater, which is allowable by state and most towns. The other thing, there's a lot of chambers and pipes like a Presby system or a Caltech system that you can use that gives you a 40% reduction in the footprint of the system. So if the PERC test says that with this many bedrooms we need 1,000 square feet, by using this other innovative alternative technology that's passive, it doesn't have a motor and it's not all that expensive, and you get a 40% reduction, you go down to 600 square feet. And that's when you can save quite a bit of money on the materials.
All right. Let's end the show by just telling people what's the best thing that they can do to extend the life of their septic system.
Just being careful what you put down there. Be mindful that your septic system is actually a compost pile, and you don't want to put things down there that are not organic. Keep greases, things like that, baby wipes out of the septic tank, and pump it out periodically, because by pumping it, you're going to remove the solids, and the wastewater going out into the leaching facility is going to be cleaner, and therefore you're going to get a much longer lifespan.
Okay, last question. Why are garbage disposals not a good idea with a septic system?
Garbage disposals introduce a lot of solid matter that's not digested by the human waste system first, and then it also chops up and liquefies that solid in such a fine matter. It does its job so well, so the food particles don't get caught in the pipes, that they also don't get caught in your septic tank, and they kind of work their way through into the leaching facility. So
and shorten the life of the
they'll
leaching
overall
facility,
shorten the
right?
life of the leach field, right?
Okay. All right. Well, Andy, thanks very much for coming
Yep.
by. We very much appreciate it. And that's our show for today. Please join us next time for the Insider's Guide to Real Estate.